Here to discuss both, we're joined tonight by the former State Department spokesperson, Morgan Ortagus. Morgan, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get right into this because I think all the attention right now is Russia and Ukraine, but the fact is, do you think President Xi in China is taking a real good look over at Taiwan saying, this is my chance?
I am certainly concerned about that. Listen, I think President Xi Jinping started looking at this leadership by President Biden, this failed leadership, I should say, especially starting last fall, last summer, whenever we saw the terrible, disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I think one of the reasons why you're seeing so many people act out in different theaters is because early into his presidency, Biden was tested and he came up lacking. It has been a weak and failed leadership at home and abroad. So listen, one of the things that we know is I believe it's in November later this year, there'll be another party congress of the Chinese Communist Party in which Xi Jinping could get another 5 years or could get, who knows how long on his tenure. He certainly wants to be emperor for life, as we've always sort of joked. So, as you watch world events, I don't know how quickly Xi Jinping would make a move on Taiwan. It would certainly be devastating if he chose to do so now. Because we would see actions breaking out in multiple theaters, right? Not only Russia, Ukraine. I mean, you now have a land war in Europe. I'm not convinced. If you're Israel and you're looking at this and you're looking at next week, the Biden administration potentially going back into what President Trump described as the worst deal, the JCPOA. If you're looking at that, and you're looking around the world, you do not see a president that has your back, that's going to stand up for you or stand up for American greatness. So we could have conflicts in multiple theaters around the world, and I think it's a very concerning time.
Morgan, I've been to Taiwan on many occasions over the past 30 years, and one of the things that I've noticed is that the Taiwan people, they don't see themselves as sort of a renegade part of China. They see themselves very independently. They're overwhelmingly grateful to live in a free country where they elect their leaders. They have built an incredible economy, but there has to be a real sense of anxiety in Taiwan as they're watching these world events take place and wondering if China were to decide to make their move, what would the U.S. do? What do you think the U.S. would do?
Yeah. Well, you have hit the nail on the head, and we have left for years, for Republican and Democratic administrations, we've had this policy of strategic ambiguity as it relates to Taiwan. The one China policy is still technically in place. Now, you'll remember quite well when President Trump came into power, before he even was inaugurated, he started making, aggressive moves towards supporting the independence of Taiwan. We have a lot of issues with Taiwan, principally, and you know this, you've reported on this before, and having been there, you know about the chips and semiconductors that are made there, that the world is dependent on. And you obviously have a country, or have a place, well, I guess we don't technically consider it a country, although we probably should, but you've got a place, like you said, where they consider themselves to be very independent. They are trying as best they can to arm themselves. But the stark reality is, if the Chinese decided to come in tomorrow, they could overwhelm Taiwan militarily. Exactly what we're seeing Russia and Ukraine happen today. Ukraine, we have armed them somewhat. They have the will to fight. They see themselves as an independent nation and democracy, which they are in Ukraine. But there is the reality of there being a significant geopolitical military force on their doorstep. Listen, it's even more troubling in Taiwan, because if the Chinese do decide to take military action in Taiwan, that would severely hamper world trade. They would effectively sort of corner the real estate, the Chinese would, in that part of the world. So that would affect American businesses, that would affect supply chains, and that would have a devastating domino effect for our allies in the Indo-Pacific. So the world needs, what the world needs is a tough, strong president like we had under Donald Trump. This administration, Governor, is obsessed with hashtags and obsessed with giving speeches and patting each other on the back and diplomatic receptions in Europe, but that is not enough. for dealing with dictators. And the American people also need to be in the fight. Listen, I'm in the military. I'm in the Navy Reserves. I've sworn an oath to protect this country, and I'll happily do that should I be called up to do so. But I think the American people need to understand also what's in it for them as it relates to what could be a potential fight for Taiwan.
There was a real mixed message, Morgan, that came out today from the press conference that the president gave. And he said that, and I'm going to quote here, no one expected this, the sanctions, to prevent war. Now, that is a direct contradiction to Vice President Harris, who about a week ago said that the sanctions are a deterrent. And even some of the mainstream press that typically never says that Joe Biden has made a mistake, they were scratching their heads and saying this is a real mixed message. So how do you interpret that? And which is it? Do sanctions have an impact or do they not? Because there's been a very divided message coming out of the same White House.
Well, it's eerily echoing what we just saw about 7 months ago in Afghanistan, right, Governor? How many times did we hear President Biden say, well, no one told me that Kabul could fall this quickly? And that clearly flew in the face of the intelligence community and the military leaders' assessment of how quickly, rapidly the Taliban was taking ground in Afghanistan. So I think that we have a lot to be concerned about here. I mean, you don't need to be in the intelligence community and seeing classified information to be able to see the buildup of Russian troops on the border of Ukraine and the threats. It was patently obvious what they were going to do. Listen, I worked sanctions for a long time, and I'm really glad you answered that question. You know, the problem with this administration is they focus all of their efforts on sanctions. Sanctions should be a broader piece of the pie, right? It is not the sole use. It's not the sole ability to change a country or change a dictator's behavior with sanctions alone. It should be a part of a broader, comprehensive strategy. And I think that the main problem that I see, and Mike Pompeo, who I worked for as Secretary of State, he often said, we have to approach the world realistically. We have to see it for how it is, for exactly how it is, not for how we want it to be. And the problem is that the left in this country, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, they constantly have looked at Putin and Xi Jinping as rational actors, you know, and that they think that they're actually worried about what's said about them in cocktail parties, right? And that's clearly not how Putin thinks. So just as President Obama underestimated ISIS, remember in President Obama's term, he called ISIS the JV squad. You know, this team, the same Obama team is around President Biden. They tend to have a lot of bravado, a lot of hashtags, a lot of impassioned speeches, but they come up short whenever it actually comes to deterring aggression, right? So this whole exercise the past few months has supposedly been about intensive diplomacy to deter Putin from acting militarily. Well, they have failed in that exercise.
Morgan, it is great to talk to you always. Thank you for joining us and getting your insights from both the military and State Department perspective. Hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.